Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the lovely offices of Eidos Montreal. My name is Anthony John Agnello, Senior Social Editor at Games Radar, and I am joined here by Mary DeMarle, who is the Executive Narrative Director. Is that the official title now?
That is correct.
Put in simpler terms, she is the story brain behind Deus Ex Human Revolution and Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Mary, tell me how you came to be involved with this sordid operation at all. How did you get in with Eidos Montreal? I know that you used to be with Ubisoft here. How did you come to be here?
Well, it's kind of a simple story. I was with Ubisoft, and then they started the Eidos Montreal studio here, and I had some friends in the industry who were saying, "Oh, Mary, you should get over there. They need a narrative person. They need a narrative designer over there." So I submitted my resume, I think, through 3 different people. Some of whom were here, and then very shortly after I got a phone call and they said, "Come on in for an interview." And I always tell the story how I was interviewed by 5 people and none of them introduced themselves to me during the entire interview.
That's awkward.
But it was fun. We had a very good time, and we all knew what they were working on, but we weren't allowed to say. And so the whole time was like, well, if I was doing a conspiracy kind of game set in a near future, I would take it in this direction. So it was fun. So that's kind of how it all started.
What fascinates me about the Deus Ex series broadly is that it has this reputation as being, you know, these wonderful stories, but then also these wonderful things about choice. And it's all about you and all of the things that you're doing as this defined character. And that's a weird proposition as a writer to go in, because you want to tell a story that makes sense. You want to make something that has a beginning, middle, and end. And that's really, really hard to do when you have a player steering that might be jumping up and down on a box near a vent. How do you go about structuring this? How do you lay everything out when you're trying to talk about who Adam Jensen is?
Well, I think one of the first design decisions we did when we created the Adam Jensen character was to give him a very rich background story, a very rich character development, so that we knew that character inside and out. But then know that the player is going to take this character and do what he wants with this character and play this character. He's going to embody him and play him in very different styles. So once we knew we had a foundation for who Adam was, then the challenge, for example, in writing him becomes, okay, now we have to give choices to the player to be this way, or this way, 3 completely different ways. And always be sure that we just maintain Jensen's voice in his responses, but without judging any of those responses, so to speak. So that's one of the big challenges in that. And then in terms of a story, it's really coming up with, you want to have your main story beats, you want to expose choices to the player, and you want to constantly think about how these choices can change those story beats, how they might loop back into it and have reactions to them, how it might affect other characters in the storyline, and try and deal with writing it all that way. And ultimately just kind of embrace those situations and say, all right, do we just ignore the fact that, okay, blowing up a bomb in this area might kind of really be against everything and cause everyone to go running away, and yet you then have to go and have a conversation with this character. Do we ignore the little reality? Do we say it's just a game? I'm always striving as much as I can with my writers to say, okay, remember those kind of situations and now craft something that is a little less, what's the word I want? That's a little more tangible or a little less specific as much as you possibly can.
Specificity is a hard thing to deal with when you're dealing with a player. There were, well, let's go with less than ecstatic reactions to the ending of Human Revolution. People were perturbed, I think, is what I'm looking for. Why are endings so difficult? And how do you lend more specificity to somebody's personal experience playing through the game when you need to come up with something that's going to be definitive, it's going to be canonical, not necessarily reflective of them?
That is, endings are hard. Endings are hard. It's, first of all, just from a story perspective, it's always difficult to come up with a single ending that is powerful and emotive and that ties everything together in a unique way that you were hoping for but not expecting at the same time. And having to do that with 5 or 6 endings is always challenging. And on Mankind Divided, we're pushing it even further, because on Human Revolution, we were having it all come down to that moment where there's a button press at the end of the game and it triggers one of the different endings. But on this one, we actually are looking at, okay, we're going to give you different actions and different choices, and you go different paths, and how does that go? So when you're embracing all those multi-faceted, branching choices, etc., it gets hard enough, and then to pull in that fulfillment of what the character wants, it does get very challenging. And I can't really give you a formula for doing it.
Right.
It all comes down to constant iteration, constant play, and constant feel for the character and the player experience.
So I do want to ask you about mechanical apartheid. And that is a loaded, loaded phrase. That's huge. That's a big gun to pull out when you're telling a story. A, why choose that phrase when, something else like discrimination is available? And 2, how do you go about bringing this in and bringing in sort of a trying to divorce yourself from cultural perspective?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to sit there and make light of a South African experience and, from the 1940s to the 1990s, but you also want to borrow that gravity. You actually want to do that. And how do you do that, and why?
Well, it's always a difficult choice when you're aware of the cultural feelings, you're aware of individuals' feelings, and there are a lot of hot button topics for a lot of people in the world. But when we're designing something, one of our philosophies is we want to create a mirror to the world. We want to create within our game a situation that can show you this is reality, this is how the world is, and we want to hold up a mirror to the world, and we want to give you that sense of the shades of gray of the world and allow you to come to your own conclusions about it. So we're dealing in this story with a situation in which we are dealing with the world being segregated in very violent ways by who is mechanically augmented and who are the so-called naturals. And when you're dealing with that situation, it becomes a grave situation, and it becomes very deep and emotional. And we're doing the best that we can to reflect a real situation without trying to offend people, without trying to step on people's toes for the experience. We're trying to pull in a lot of different voices to give it not just a single voice that has not had any experience with it in their own lives, but and really just kind of put it out there and try and get people thinking about it. Because if we are afraid to face the world with a critical eye, then what's the point in moving forward?
When you say that you're bringing in people who sort of have different perspectives and different world experiences, is there a South African member of the team who lived during apartheid? Is there anybody working on the team who has lived in a country or culture where government-enforced segregation has been reality?
We do have a very diverse team. I can't answer that directly to say that because I don't know everyone on, where their personal stories are. But we do have a very diverse team. We have people from all over the world who have worked here. We have people who have dealt with racism. We have people on the team who have dealt with sexism. We have a diverse team, and kind of trying to mold as true an experience as we can, as honestly as possible through the voices and the reflections of everyone who is working on it.
So how do you manage expectation of audience when you're writing? When you're sitting there coming up with a story, with Human Revolution, you can sit there and say, we have the background of this, there is another developer who's very, very notable, who this was his baby, and that's the only expectations we have going. But now Human Revolution exists, and people are like, oh, well, I loved it, or I hated it and I want it to be these things. And then you have the added audience, pressure of, when you release a trailer and you use a phrase like mechanical apartheid, that adds an entirely new layer. This is a lot to manage. These are a lot of different factors. How does that affect the way you guys write? Do you shut it out? How do you shut it out? Is it possible to shut it out?
You do have to some extent, you have to shut it out. You have to know that I'm going to speak for myself here. I'm very passionate about my work, and I want to make the best work that I possibly can. And to do that, you have to have some level of focus. I'm terrified of the fact that I know that the more we put out, the more people are expecting. And if I were to sit there and think, oh, wow, can I ever meet those expectations? It would literally freeze my creativity. It would make me stop writing. So you do have to kind of put the blinders on, and you have to focus on, for me, the word, the experience, the acting. You have to work with the people that you're working with. And just kind of know that you're putting your heart and soul into something, and you're going to let it out there and see what happens when it gets out there. And I've always believed that I'm working in a creative field, and creativity is subjective. So I've had early comments early in my career where people hated stuff that I had done, and I'm like, well, creative works affect everybody differently, and all you can do is work on it and try and make it the best that you possibly can.
Mary, I've read internet comments. According to internet comments, creativity is objective. They're very insistent on this point. So the gameplay director on Mankind Divided is new to Eidos Montreal. This is his first game, but he's not new to working with you.
No.
Patrick Fortier and you have a very long history of working on games. You guys worked on Myst 4 together, Splinter Cell. I'm curious, how has your working relationship together changed over the past decade?
That is a good question. Now what can I tell about Pat? It has changed. I think it's grown deeper. I think when I first started working with Pat, it was on the Myst 4 games, and he was my boss. He was my direct boss. And it was interesting then trying to find, Pat is an extremely creative person, and trying to kind of figure out the ins and outs of how we're working together and sharing and growing from each other is really, really cool. And since then, I think we've both gotten older and wiser and more experienced in our careers. And so now it's kind of a little bit more, he's not my direct boss now, so that's an interesting facet of it. But it's still that very tight creative sharing. I think Pat brings insights into my work, which is really appreciated. And a lot of times I am turning to him to say, how does this feel? What do you think when you're reading this? Sometimes he surprises me with his answers, because it's not what I was expecting, but other times it's dead on. So it's really been great working with him and having him come back, because we were not working together for quite a few years. It's been really great working with him again.
See, it's weird because I look at, when you guys were first working together, there were always these expectations of what a game needed to do mechanically. When you picked up a controller, people wanted it to be new and all of these brand new ideas, and it needs to be the highest quality. It was always about technological benchmarks and blah, 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 blah. And the writing came afterwards. Mm-hmm. And that is no longer the case. I feel like the expectations for writing in games are much, much greater now. How do you think the act of writing for a game has changed most dramatically in the past 10 years?
Well, it's true what you said. I mean, I've been in the industry for a long time, and in the beginning, people were always like, you're a writer. What do you do? You're working in games. What do you do as a writer? But now it's definitely not that. Now I think in my career path and the games that I've worked on, I've been working with teams that are realizing more and more that we're not just creating a game, we're not just creating a story, we're creating a universe. And the universe tells a story. And for everything to make sense in that universe, you need to understand narrative, and you need to understand what is the narrative that is being told by this environment, what is the narrative being told by this character. This character lives in this environment. What should it reflect? So from my part, the writing becomes much more than just a script. It becomes much more guiding artists and animators and things to say, this is the personality you're reflecting. These are the visuals that this is the story you want to tell through your visual art. So it starts with that, and then in terms of writing, it also becomes understanding that we aren't dealing with movies. We aren't dealing with passive, long things. We're dealing with an interactive medium in which characters want to, or players, I should say, are interested in story sometimes, but sometimes they just want to be playing. And how can we build the levels and build the interactions within the level from that to make sure that they are both conveying the game and the game design and the game experience, and yet also the story that we want to be telling. So from my aspect, the writing becomes kind of a little bit of everything.
Mary, at this point, do you think that you could, I'm not saying Mankind Divided is the one. It's not going to be like the greatest story you tell. But do you feel like you could tell whatever story that you came up with in a game and actually have it be reflected in the game at this point? Or are we not there yet?
Well, it's interesting. That's kind of a trick question because
It is.
the story that it's kind of, I remember a quote sometime and it was something like, from the very first word a writer puts down on the page, the beautiful shining image that they had envisioned is forever ruined. So envisioning the greatest story from start to finish for a game and then actually creating it, I don't think it would ever end up being what I had envisioned.
Probably not.
Because I find that through the game experience and through working with people like Pat, working with the design team, working with the level artists and level designers, they find ways to take the story and raise it to a different level and a better level often, and sometimes not, and sometimes I have to fix that. So will we reach that level where we can tell truly engaging, interesting stories in games? I think we are reaching that level, and I think we will only continue to improve. Will it be the story that I envisioned from the get-go? No, because if it is, then I think there's something wrong.
Well, what's missing right now? What do you still don't have access to?
I think there's, it's really at this point, for me, I mean, when you're thinking about an interactive story and you're thinking about player choices, the big challenge for me is how do we allow those choices in and maintain that strong, tight, compelling story without going off with a million resources and a million lines and a million things. I don't know. For me, it's like keeping track of finding the ways to track that story and track all those interactions and still make them as big as possible. So what's missing right now is probably some of the technology. I'm not sure, quite honestly.
Mary, thank you so much for your time. Deus Ex Mankind Divided is out in February of 2016.
All right, folks, thanks for watching. And if you want to see more great GR Plus videos, well, our YouTube page is right over here. And if you want to get your READ read on, the GR Plus website is right over there.